Uh, hopefully, I hope you see a praying mantis saying something silly. Give me a thumbs up if that's the case.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, here we go then. All right. Um, One of my primary responsibilities down at College Park is to work with our green industries, particularly arborists and landscapers, to try to build more sustainable landscapes through a whole variety of techniques and tools. I work with arborists, landscapers, but the other big clientele group, of course, are master gardeners, master naturalists, and the general public. What I try to convey is that we all are stewards of this environment. And in so much that we work with plants, we work with pests, we work with beneficial insects, what my goal is try to take care of this world in a way that our grandchildren and their grandchildren have something to look forward to. Sustainability is one of the primary objectives of my research and application, my outreach. And to me, this means kind of building building systems, managed and natural systems that will again serve not only our needs but the needs of future generations, eliminating threats to biodiversity and ecosystem processes and functions, and in many cases, maintaining and restoring ecosystems. So these are kind of the overarching goals in my work. Now, I work primarily in urban forest sites. These are some of my study sites here in Maryland, up in Central Park, and in other big cities around the East Coast here. And over the years, I've tried to enumerate what some of the threats are to these ecosystems, these highly managed systems. There are six, I think, that are primarily important here. We'll touch on several of these tonight. We won't get to all of them in detail. This is going to be maybe a mile wide and a millimeter deep, but I'll try to touch on elements of all of these things, including the lack of plant and animal biodiversity in the urban systems, the importation of non-native invasive species, substitution of non-native plants for native plants, climate change, the warming world, impervious surfaces, which are the characteristics of the built environment, which contribute to loss of water infiltration, soil compaction, plant stress. And finally, we won't be able to get too deep into this one tonight, but the anthropogenic inputs of nutrients, pesticides, and light. Now, I want to back out. I'm hoping that most of you are familiar with the insect apocalypse. I had the pleasure of being able to take over a course that Bill Lamp first developed a few years ago when Bill stepped back a little bit, and I had a great deal of fun learning about what this apocalypse was and examining some of the evidence for the apocalypse. But basically, this started in 2018 with a story in the New York Times by Brooke Jarvis. Um, some of you, I hope, are familiar, have seen this article. So we're going to frame a lot of what I have to say around this tonight. For those of you who have not read this book, Silent Earth, by a colleague and friend, Dave Golson, I think this is an excellent lay treatment of the underlying factors of the insect apocalypse with a nice description of several of the things we'll cover tonight with plenty of examples. It's an easy read. I'd recommend this to anybody who's interested in this topic. So let's spend a minute with the study that kicked this all off. Okay, first published in PLOS 1 in 2017, the Crefeld study by Casper Holman and others. The location was in Germany, in Krefeld, Germany. Sampling was done with malaise traps, And all the areas studied were protected areas. These were areas devoid of development, agriculture, protected areas that had been stable for relatively long periods of time. What they were able to show is a dramatic decline in biomass. Remember, they're using Malaise traps. They weren't doing counts. They were doing weight, okay? Some people have criticized this, but I think the data is pretty clear-cut here. From about 1989, when the study first began, to when it ended, I think, I'm sorry, it started in about 2016, it ended. You can see a very clear trend of reduction in the biomass of insects being trapped. Here's the seasonal data. The lighter colored bars are the ones more recent, 2016, the dark colored bars. So it was consistent throughout the season, is what this graph tells us. Now, some of the threats to insects in general that we'll talk about in the next few minutes are these: habitat loss and destruction, urbanization, which is often coupled with habitat loss, pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides, non-native and invasive species, climate change, and light pollution. These are all things we'll touch on. There's a fundamental issue here that I think we have to discuss right up front. It took more than 150,000 years to get the first billion. It took just slightly more than a century to get the second billion on planet Earth. And it's getting relatively shorter each year that goes by. So there's an enormous population of people. This is kind of curious here. There seems to be a little asymptote or inflection in the curve here. Maybe that has to do with reduced birth rates or something, but there's no question that more people all the time. People need food, they need fresh water, and they need places to live. This creates a tension between the natural world and the built world. There's been a big shift in the population here in the United States and frankly throughout the world. In the 1800s, we were largely a rural population. We were agrarian, we were farmers. And by 2000, this has changed. It basically flipped. All right, so now we are an urban population here in the US. Here in the eastern deciduous forest, how does natural become the suburbs and the urban forest? It's basically a subtraction of experiment. The first and most dramatic change, of course, is agriculture, where we go from a biodiversity, a plant biodiversity of perhaps 100 or more species here to a single species. And as you all know, each of these species might have a dozen or more different kinds of insects associated with them. In a soybean field, we might have a half dozen insects that are important. So your biodiversity is dramatically reduced. This is what I call the urbanization gradient. The next big insult is this, of course, where all the trees are removed and all the soil is removed as well. This, as you might guess, dramatically changes the microbial communities and everything associated with biodiversity. This can go one of two ways. Things can get better, and they do get better in some cases, or things can get worse. That's worse. The equation for photosynthesis is CO2 plus H2O, right? Gives oxygen and sugar. There isn't a lot of H2O here. The impervious surface is the #1 enemy of plants in the built environment. A study I did a few years ago looked at how this diversity changes along the urbanization gradient. I examined basically residential landscapes in some 200 home sites in Maryland, Montgomery and Prince George's County and Howard County. And the plant density was somewhere north of about 69,000 plants per kilometer square. This is woody plant material. Plant diversity, more than 100 species. And if we look at nearby cities, we see the plant diversity has declined dramatically. as has the plant density and diversity showed dramatic decline. So again, this is one of the major features of urbanization. I call this the diversity dilemma. And this diversity dilemma is going to have some very important and profound impacts on the communities of arthropods associated. Number one, of course, is there's a direct relationship, and again, this is from some 200 home sites here in Maryland, a direct relationship between the number of plant species and the number of primary consumers, right? The number of herbivores. This is not surprising. When you plant an azalea in a landscape, you can now have azalea lacebug, right? So this is a fundamental relationship, but again, keep this in mind that, again, the fewer plants we have, the fewer primary consumers, and that will, of course, ripple up through the different trophic levels as well. Now, if we look at host use by herbivores, we can see that the great majority of herbivorous insects specialize at a family level. There are very few that have a wide dietary breadth across several families of plants. So if you're a specialist plant-eating insect and you lose your host plant, you fundamentally have lost your home. We see this across the world. This is a natural landscape in England. This is London. This is the landscape here in Howard County. And this is the campus of the University of Maryland. Long before the Crefeld study, there were other scientists, other entomologists who made note of this. We can see some data here collected in 1983 by Pyle, basically demonstrating that in cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, Staten Island, and Aurora, Colorado, as many as, in this case, 40% of the species of butterflies were either extinct or endangered. So again, along with urbanization, many of our charismatic species like butterflies are going to decline. Let's look at something a little closer to home. Let's look at our state butterfly, the Baltimore checker spot. It's a pretty cool insect. As you know, one of its primary host plants is turtlehead. This is where turtlehead likes to grow. That's where turtlehead doesn't grow so much once this becomes that. So here in Maryland, our Baltimore checker spot is actually endangered species. In other places throughout the range, not so much, but here, because of habitat destruction, it has become endangered. My friends, the monarch butterflies. I mean, how can you not love these things? And again, these have generated an enormous amount of interest with the general public and throughout the world, frankly. Again, what we see, if you had the good fortune to get down to the Oyamel fir forests in Mexico, or maybe an easier place is to get out to Pacific Grove, out on the Monterey Peninsula, and have a look at their overwintering sites. I want to talk just a minute very briefly about our western monarchs, which are in great peril right now. Again, for those of you who had not had a chance to visit the monarchs, this is probably the easiest place to get to, but I'm warning you, you better go quickly because they're dramatically declining, and they've actually in recent years dropped below the hypothetical extinction line. Last winter, the winter of 2025-26, there were only 12,000 monarchs recorded across the 249 study sites, down from about 1.2 million back in the early years when this was first evaluated. So Unfortunately, they were going to be considered for the endangered species qualification this December, but that got kicked down the road, and they're put on basically long-term hold now. So there was actually going to be action to consider placing them on, but our administration decided not to do that. Now, we've talked about the monarch, but let's speak a little bit more broadly about macro moths and butterflies in across all North America. A nice study done by Tara Cornelise back in 2025, just last year, demonstrated that for our butterflies, the best estimate is about 19.5, 20% of these are facing extinction. Of our macro moths, about 16%. All right, this is a pretty major dose of the charismatic moths and butterflies that we find throughout our land. What are some of the major drivers here? Well, climate change is one, the blue shaded areas, agriculture, as you might suspect, in the Midlands of our country. I thought it was kind of curious that here in Maryland, we were lumped in, the primary source was pollution. This was largely related to chemical inputs for agriculture and non-agricultural purposes. The close second here in Maryland was actually housing and urban development. So that study concluded that these were the major
I
drivers.
don't know what you get.
Why did you bring this stuff in here?
Hey, George.
Yeah. Oh, wait a minute.
Hi. Did you have a question? George Forster, thank you. Okay. My hydraulic chair is sinking, guys. So if you see me disappear off the screen, I'm not trying to get out of town. The other charismatic group, of course, we look for, or we have the best data for, in addition to the Lepidoptera, of course, are the Hymenoptera. Again, this is Dave Gulson specializes in bees of various kinds over in the UK and throughout Europe. Limited floral resources, parasites and pathogens, neonicotinoids, he's really zoomed in on, and pyrethroids, fungicides as well. So let's have a look at how, in this case, particularly neonicotinoids might be impacting some of our charismatic bees. This was a study published in 2012 by Dave and his colleagues. And basically what they did is in the laboratory, they exposed bumblebees to neonicotinoid insecticides in pollen sources and nectar sources. They then took those nascent colonies out into the field and watched how those colonies developed after an exposure to neonicotinoid insecticides. What they learned is the control colonies added weight much faster and significantly more than the two exposures to the neonicotinoid insecticide. Okay. Of course, cumulative colony weight is basically a measure of how successful that particular colony of bumblebees is doing. The other more interesting thing I thought was the actual number of queens that were produced following the exposures, a significant reduction in the number of queens produced in colonies that had had early exposure to neonicotinoid insecticides. Okay, a second study that looked a little bit more broadly, Western bumblebee declines in the continental United States. And here, what they were really looking at was the distribution, occupancy of the various bees throughout different locations in the United States, how many records there were of these particular bumblebee species in Western states. And the independent variable was time here. Okay, so between 98 and 2018, you can see dramatic reductions in the ranges the occupancy probabilities of these various species of bumblebees. Pretty clear evidence that many of the sites that were formerly occupied by bumblebees are no longer occupied. All right, so that's North America. What's going on over in Europe? Let's have a look over there in the Netherlands. The Europeans actually are perhaps a little bit ahead of us in terms of keeping record. There are many clubs that simply go out and have been going out and recording along transects for very long periods of time, the various insects that they see. These records date back actually to the 1890s and the early 1900s. These predate dramatically from the Crefeld study. But what you can see again is the indicator, the multi-species indicator of sites or areas occupied has declined dramatically between the late 1800s and 2017. So again, an 80% decline of butterflies in the Netherlands. Now, herbivores are not the only ones that lose their home. Predators may also decline. This was a study I undertook a few years ago with one of my postdocs. Some of my favorite guys are these guys, the Calisoma beetles, right? Scrutator and Wilcoxi. The big guy and the little guy. You know, they're called ground beetles. But one really fun thing about these guys is if you go out in the summertime and there are caterpillars up in the trees, let me mute that. You can actually see these guys up in the treetops eating things like cankerworms. Pretty remarkable, I'd say. Of course, we know the larvae are soil dwellers. They're predators in the soil in their immature stages. So what we were interested was to find out if there had been losses and gains of ground beetles due to urbanization. All right, so we conducted a meta-analysis of hundreds of studies that had involved ground beetles all over the world, all the studies that we could find that fit our criteria. I'm going to show you response variables of our log response ratio. Basically, the way this is going to work, there's going to be a zero line here. Everybody on this side of the zero line is doing better due to urbanization. Everybody on this side of the line is doing worse due to urbanization. We're going to look at species richness, family level abundance, and species abundances. Okay? Stick with me on this. It's not going to be painful. The grand summary here found that species richness significantly declined due to urbanization, maybe not so much for family level abundance, but also the species abundances declined dramatically due to urbanization. Now, stick with me on this. If we look at the different kinds of ground beetles here, what we found in terms of size category, it was mostly medium and large beetles. If we look at the habitat, it was primarily ones in mixed habitats and also in the forest. These were the guys that, not surprisingly, declined. If we looked at who had wings and who didn't, well, brachypters, not surprisingly, suffered the most. And if we looked at the trophic level, again, it was predators. All right. So, large forest-dwelling predators. Does the loss of predaceous forest-dwelling carabids in cities have a ripple effect on herbivorous insects then? This is Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a treed city. These are what those trees look like. Cankerworms. Cankerworm populations in Charlotte regularly reach outbreak levels and defoliate the trees. These are primarily fall cankerworms. two different color morphs. A study found that more than 70,000 acres had experienced defoliation in 2012 alone. Historically, they see outbreaks for many, many different years. And I just wonder if the reason that we see so many cankerworm outbreaks in places like Charlotte and also in places along I-95 as we drive down to Richmond is simply because our carabid beetles don't do very well. Impervious surface is not the place a carabid larvae wants to be. Okay, so can it have ripple effects? Again, there's no cause and effect here. I didn't really test this, but I think there's a pretty good chance that perhaps those outbreaks we see may be related to simply the absence of these large predatory forest-dwelling beetles that simply don't do so hot in a big city. All right, we've looked at some changes of arthropods in temperate biomes. Let's take a little trip down to the tropics and see what's going on in the rainforests. I was talking to Mike a little while ago. He had been down in Borneo, Malaysia, not too long ago. Here I am, and that's a really big tree. We saw elephants, orangutans, really cool birds, monkeys, sun bears, things like that. These are special ecosystems. I'm sure many of you have visited tropical rainforests, perhaps in Central or South America or other parts of the world. I think what most people don't realize is that these very special places are more than just a curiosity for biodiversity. About 25% of our Western prescription pharmaceuticals are derived from plants we find in rainforests, and 2/3 of all drugs with cancer-fighting agents come from these plants. So these are enormously beneficial, and not only for their biodiversity, but for the ecosystem service they provide for important purposes like drugs to fight disease and cancers. The tropics are in trouble. Tropical rainforests. The greatest losses are in the Amazon, followed by places like Malaysia, Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and also Burma, the Congo. But again, by far, the greatest loss is taking place in countries like Brazil. Golson wrote that 75,000 square kilometers per year are disappearing, the size of New Jersey, 200 kilometers per day. This one, I don't know how he figured this out, 135 rainforest species extinct each day. I couldn't verify this, but this is a claim that David made in one of his papers. Okay, what are some of the causes of loss in the rainforest? Well, of course, wood for timber and fire, agriculture, both small and large scale, land for farmers to live on, grazing of cattle, pulp for paper, road construction, and extraction of minerals and energy. I want to talk about palm oil for a minute. This is a primary forest in Costa Rica. This is what that primary forest now looks like as we travel by air. And as we get a little closer, we can see that these are palm oil plantations that have replaced the natural vegetation. What is palm oil? This is palm oil. What's it found in? See anything on your list there that you ate yesterday? It's found in many products. Look at the label sometime and see how many products have palm oil. Now, a nice study was done where they compared the primary forest to the primary forest untouched to secondary forests and palm oil plantations. All right, we're only going to deal with this combination here, the primary forest and harvested forests. The data showed, again, this is the same layout that I showed you for my carabid study, but basically everybody on this side of the line is doing worse. Anybody on this side of the line is doing better as long as their line does not intersect, is clear of the central line. As you can see, nobody is clear of the central line. Everybody on average is doing worse with ants, dung beetles, bats, birds, ants, moths, beetles, more birds, and different types of beetles. All right, so dramatic loss in species richness. There were also dramatic losses in the actual abundance of arthropods and other animals in these systems. All right, I want to go back now and start to look at some of these things that I'm interested in terms of a little closer to home here on the East Coast. And I want to talk about climate change for a few minutes. You know, this is the picture I always use when people say, well, I don't really think climate change is a real thing. These are two pictures of Glacier National Park, one taken in 1938, the other in 2019. It takes centuries to make a glacier that's a mile thick. We have lost this glacier in whatever that is. What is that, like 70 years or something like that, 80 years, right? So if the world didn't get warmer, how do you explain the loss of that much ice in so short a time? All right. So this is what I like to show people when I'm talking about climate change. We all know the causes, the accumulation of greenhouse gases following the Industrial Revolution when we began to combust fossil fuels. And again, this is data from EPA. The major contributor for this is not natural drivers, it's the human drivers that are causing the rapid temperature change in our atmosphere. What might Maryland look like? Well, here we are in 2025. These are degrees Fahrenheit change that are projected under high emission rates or lower emission rates. So in a relatively short period of time, by 2100, if we don't make some changes, our average temperatures could be 12.5 degrees warmer than they are right now. All right, a fairly substantial difference. We're going to zoom back for a minute to the cloud forest. I hope many of you have seen the cloud forest, but my question always is, can you tell me what makes a cloud forest? What are the two factors that have to be in place? Well, of course, number one has to be moisture, and the other is temperature, elevation. So the warm air from the ocean or the Amazon basin is heated. Warm air can hold more moisture than cool air. But as that moisture rises, let's say up the slope of a mountain, it then cools and it forms a cloud. So in a warming world, does a cloud forest get higher or does a cloud forest get lower? Well, in a warming world, a cloud forest must go ever higher before it reaches a cool enough temperature to form a cloud. What does this mean? It means some of the charismatic and unique species that we only find in rainforests and cloud forests may be in danger of disappearing. The real champion of this has, of course, been Dan Jansen with his long-term studies in Costa Rica of cloud forests, rainforests, and dry forests. And this is a graphic that I find fascinating. This is a picture of the cloud forest on two volcanoes in 1985, 1995, and 20 years later. In a warming world, the cloud forest simply disappears. There are species of animals and plants in a cloud forest we haven't even named. We don't have any idea what secrets they might hold, what new drugs might be found. If we look at the light trap catches from 1980 And again, in 2019, in the same location at the same light trap, there's a very dramatic difference and clear difference in the trap catches here. So unfortunately, our rainforests, our cloud forests are imperiled, dramatically imperiled. And I view this as a major crisis in our world at this point in time related to global climate change. How about closer to home? One of my favorite hikes used to be Old Rag Mountain. It's it's an outlier in the Shenandoah chain. A great hike. The first hour of that hike used to be through a beautiful Canadian hemlock forest. Once the hemlock woolly adelgid arrived, all we have left of our beautiful hemlocks in this forest are ghost trees. It was almost total extirpation. The hashes here identify the range of Tsuga canadensis, Canadian hemlock. The gray areas indicate where the temperatures, the cold winter temperatures, are warm enough for hemlock woolly adelgid to survive. The projection for 2070 is that if we continue at the same rate of warming, all these areas we now see in orange will be available for hemlock woolly adelgid to survive, and we expect to see extirpation of Canadian hemlocks in places like Wisconsin, Minnesota, Upper Peninsula, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, New York. So climate change is going to shift the distributions of insects to the disadvantage of many of our native plants. Crepe myrtles are a southern plant. We've now changed here in Maryland from maybe a zone 6 to a zone 7, bordering on zone 8. Now we can grow crepe myrtles here in Maryland. This is outside one of our buildings on campus. Well, guess what? We have an exotic plant and it's got an exotic pest. This is crepe myrtle bark scale. It's now warm enough not only for crepe myrtle to survive here, but crepe myrtle bark scale. And this is what crepe myrtle bark scale does to a crepe myrtle. The Lone Star tick. This is its historic range. It was primarily a southern tick. When I first started my work 40 years ago, the most common tick that came into my lab was going to be a black-legged tick for identification. The most common tick that comes in now to me is a Lone Star tick. So we're seeing a dramatic range expansion of Lone Star tick, and of course diseases like alpha-gal and starry and some of the other diseases that are transmitted by that tick. Mosquitoes. At 70 degrees, again, it's going to take them 14 days for Culex. At 90 degrees, 7 days. So that means in a warming world or in the inner city, they're going to complete twice as many generations in the same period of time. And again, in Maine, these are big problems. I'm glad we don't have that problem here. What this translates into is simply more biting days. This is data for Cleveland, Ohio. So now we have 20 more days that mosquitoes can bite. Why? Because spring starts earlier and it goes later. We simply have more time for mosquitoes to breed and bite. Spider mites are one of the problems I work on all the time. At 59 degrees Fahrenheit, it's going to take them 36 days to complete a full generation. But at 86 degrees, they're going to do it in 7 days. This is why spider mites are outbreaking in places like City, where we have urban heat islands and plants that are gaining radiant energy. It's simply allowing so many more generations of spider mites to take place. All right, let's look at something else. Let's skip over and talk a little bit about some of the anthropogenic inputs of nutrients. And in this case, the other one, I'm not going to do the pesticides any further today, I don't think, but let me talk about light pollution. This is one I get a lot of questions about. What I want to show you is pictures from space of artificial light at night. Okay, ALAN, artificial light at night. 1950s, 1970s, 1997, 2025. So we look like, it looks like bauble Earth. Earth now looks like a bauble in the sky at nighttime. Why is it important to insects? Well, we all know that insects use light to navigate, right? So artificial light at night is going to affect navigation, right? Moths and butterflies and dung beetles are using light from distant light sources like planets and stars in the Milky Way to go in a straight line. Communication, think about things like fireflies, interactions between species, Photinus and Photurus, for example, foraging activity. Photoperiods will affect foraging activity of herbivores and predators, and of course, timing big life cycle events. How photoperiod induces diapause and things like this. So many different ways. The question I often get asked is it affecting fireflies? Well, there was a nice study done by the University of Virginia over at Blandy Experimental Station, I think is where this took place. And what they did was they put lights in fields where fireflies were. So some fields were illuminated at night, some fields were not. What they found was a trend, and they measured the abundance of fireflies by the number of flashes they saw. The trend in Pyralis was just a slightly lower, but in the predator, Photurus, there was a significant reduction in the abundance of fireflies there. Okay. In addition to this, with the number of male flashes, again, there were trends for fewer flashing by males and females. In other words, less communication. There was a significant difference for the male flashes. So a little bit of evidence that this kind of artificial light at night can affect mating behaviors of things like our fireflies. And of course, this can translate into reductions in abundance if these things can't find their mates. Again, I'm going to revisit my model here. We've talked about it before. We've talked about the diversity dilemma, but let's now talk about another piece of this puzzle. I looked at low diversity sites, home sites that had only 3 species of plants, and higher diversity sites with 34 species. But another major difference here was the structural complexity, where we had ground cover, shrubs, low trees, high trees, canopies. As I said before, there's a direct relationship between the number of plants in a landscape, a residential landscape, and the number of herbivores. We then looked at the effects of these things on the biodiversity of predators in these sites. We looked at species richness, but as I've also mentioned, we also looked at this factor we call structural complexity. What we did is we put a box, a 1-meter box over this whole landscape, and we measured how much vegetation was found in each box. Overstory, understory, ground cover, herbaceous plants and shrubs. This is what we call a complex landscape. This is what we call a simple landscape. We then used a white rat that we like to use in our studies. It's called azalea lice bug. This is a primary pest. In fact, it is the most common pest found in a residential landscape. A lot of people think it's Japanese beetle. It is not. Why? Because almost everybody in Maryland and Washington, D.C. has a half dozen azaleas in their landscape that get infested with azalea lice bug. What we found was in the simple landscapes, we had basically a tenfold difference, even greater than that, maybe a hundredfold difference in the abundance of lace bugs on azaleas in the simple landscape compared to the complex landscape. Why this difference? Well, we examined whether it was a top-down effect, the abundance of predators, predator pressure, survival of lace bugs, and alternate prey. Let me go through the data with you. What we sampled in addition to the lace bugs were the number of predators we observed in those landscapes. The red numbers are the ones that we found significantly greater number of generalists, particular taxa, anaphanids, tomistids, predatory crickets, katydids. The only one exception, there was a specialized mirid that was more common in the simple landscape. We then brought the predators in and we put them in a little arena. We knew their abundance now. We measured how many lace bugs they could feed in a unit time, the feeding rate. We then created a simple index. Oops, let me back out here. A simple index which we call predator pressure, which is the basically the multiplicative of the abundance time the feeding rate. And what we found, the predator pressure in the complex landscape was approximately 3 to 4 times greater than in the simple landscape. And there was a direct relationship between the number of lace bugs in a landscape and the predator pressure in those landscapes. So the greater the predator pressure, the fewer lace bugs there were. So in these complex landscapes that I showed you before, what we believe happens is in this landscape, after the predators are done snacking on lace bugs, they can go up to the dogwood and maybe feed on leaf hoppers, or go over to a pyracantha or a spirea and feed on aphids, and then go up into the treetop and feed on scale crawlers. And by the time they're done there, the lace bugs are back on the azaleas. So your predators become resident in this landscape. But in this landscape, the predators have two choices. Once the lace bugs are gone, they can migrate or die. All right, so this kind of complexity in a landscape can favor, it can overcome that problem of loss of biodiversity that I mentioned up front. There's another thing that happens along the urbanization gradient, and that's a shift not only in the diversity of plants, but also the origin of plants. If we look at cities like Baltimore, Boston, LA, Miami, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Phoenix, and Salt Lake City, what I want you to see here is the cultivated non-native plants and natural. I can't see the top. I got to lose this bar here for a second. How do I do that? I don't know here. But anyway, what you can see very clearly in the overall picture is we have many more cultivated and naturally occurring non-native plants in the city landscapes, in the built environment, than in a, let's say, a natural environment. So we have a shift away from native plants towards a greater proportion of non-native plants. Well, we know that certain non-native plants simply don't support many herbivores. Things like our Bradford pears, our ginkgos, our honeysuckles, Japanese honeysuckles. There's a long list of these things. And of course, if you've had the good fortune to listen to my colleague and friend Doug Tallamy talk about the importance of native plants in creating biodiversity in landscapes, you'll have an understanding of why this is so important. Very simply put, the greater proportion of native plants we have in a landscape, the greater abundance we're going to have and diversity of various kind of herbivorous insects. And there's a direct relationship, again, between higher trophic levels. The more butterflies that we have in a landscape, the more birds we're also going to be found in these landscapes. Okay, so certainly for for Lepidoptera, again, there's a direct relationship between the number of native plants in a landscape and the number of birds we might expect to find in that landscape. Now, there are four possibilities of what we can have. I call this the coevolutionary matrix. This is a concept that I developed with my colleague Dan Herms and Paula Shrewsbury in an annual review article we did. But basically, we can have non-native plants and non-native insects. We can have native plants and non-native insects. We can have non-native plants and native insects. And we can have native plants and native insects. We've just done native plants and native insects, right? That's what Doug has showed us. Specialists are going to be favored in this case. What I want to do next, I want to talk about the combination of non-native plants and non-native insects. What I mean by enemy release is when we bring in a non-native insect from a foreign land, it comes without its biological control agent, its full complement of predators, parasitoids, and pathogens that might help reduce populations back in the native range. We call this enemy release. So let's have a quick peek at enemy release. In my world, when we have euonymus, we get euonymus scale. I've already mentioned that when we have azaleas, we're going to have azalea lacebug. And unfortunately, this year in Maryland, if you have boxwoods out in Washington County, the box tree moth has crossed our border, and this is what your boxwood hedge is going to look like after a single season of infestation by the box tree moth. This was a site that I visited at the second infestation out near Clear Spring. This is not going to be a joke, gang. This is a pest that devastated the natural forests of boxwoods in Germany and the Netherlands in 2008, United Kingdom. Let's get the picture in here. It was detected in Toronto in 2018. In 2021, there were boxwoods shipped out of Toronto, Canada, into 25 retail locations in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Michigan, Ohio, South Carolina, and a distribution center in Tennessee. Confirmed in 2021 in Michigan, also found in New York. 2022, well established in Michigan, also in Massachusetts, Ohio, Kentucky, 24 Delaware and Pennsylvania, 25 Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland in September of 2025. It crossed the line into Washington County. As I said, this is what it might look like in September of one year. This is what those plants will look like 1 year later. This is going to be a major issue for us, and this is an entire story in and of itself. I can't get into it tonight, but if you guys have questions at the end, I'd be happy to discuss them. Let's talk about this case now, the native plant and the non-native insect. Again, the non-native insect will enjoy enemy release. It'll also come into a place we call defense-free space. What does that mean? It means there's been no coevolutionary relationship between our native plant and that invader. This is going to create a huge problem. You okay? Okay, somebody unmuted there for a second. Our first real taste of this, well, the first real taste, of course, came with American chestnut blight, but I want to go into the urban environment where I worked. if we look at the loss of elms in Washington, D.C., from about 40,000 here in the 50s to less than 10,000 in the 2000s, two strains of Ophiostoma were introduced. One in 1928, it came in with logs from Europe, and a second one in the 1940s. This one was more virulent. We also imported the smaller European elm bark beetle, which is a really good vector for Ophiostoma. This is an aerial shot of neighborhoods in Milwaukee. You can see the elm trees lining these streets. This is 56, this is 79. I'm sure some of the guys, I see some people that look like me in the little pictures. I'm sure you remember what Dutch elm disease was like as it moved through Washington, D.C. in our area. 40 million elm trees killed since 1930. What was the lesson? What was the lesson of Dutch elm disease? Well, people said we should diversify the urban forest, right, to prevent this kind of catastrophic loss. Well, so a little later on, I spent a lot of time walking around cities in North America. And, as I walked around these cities, I said, somehow they just don't seem all that diverse. So what we did, we got surveys for a dozen cities indicated by the stars, and this is what we learned. We replaced an elm forest with an ash forest and, a maple forest and an ash forest. There were some oak trees and honey locusts and such. And then we imported the Asian longhorn beetle and the emerald ash borer. So as I like to talk to urban designers and urban foresters, I hope the next generation of people that design cities can understand the importance of diversification. So as we reforest our cities on the heels of things like Asian longhorn beetle and emerald ash borer, perhaps we can really strive to have a far greater diversity of trees in our urban forests, given the fact that we certainly are going to have more invasive pests through time. Those cities face an average percent of trees at risk of about 50%. So I think for a while, let's give maples and ash a break. Maybe let's look at a broader palette. Or we can once again face catastrophic loss in our cities. Emerald ash borer, again, one of my favorite insects to talk about. I think you all know the story. We've experienced it here in Maryland. But to get back to the point of the coevolutionary matrix, a great study done by my colleague Dan Herms, who was then at Ohio State, he created a nursery where he had American ash and green ash. He had a hybrid of Manchurica, the Asian ash, and the Asian ash in a plantation. So when we have a non-native pest and a native and non-native plant, who lives and who dies? Our native ash die. The non-native ash suffers far lower mortality. Why? Because Manchurica has been duking it out for 20 million years back in Asia with emerald ash borer, and it knows how to defend itself. When emerald ash borer enters our country, it comes into defense-free space. Our North American ash trees simply have not evolved. They don't have the defenses to defend themselves. Okay? Let's look at another situation. By the way, that's what Manchurica looks like. That's a good-looking ash tree, in my opinion, that can serve as a food source for many of the other herbivores that feed on ash. Okay, let's look at the different situations. Suppose we have a non-native plant, but it comes into a space where there are native insects. This is the case we see with bronze birch borer and resistance of birch trees. 30 years ago, when I would go to meetings with my municipal arborists and nursery folks, they were talking about these fantastic, fantastic birch trees that were coming from places like Europe and Asia, and they'd be wonderful addition to our landscapes. And boy, maybe they were going to beat the bronze birch borer. Again, a great study done at Ohio State. Several 200 reps, native species, Niagara, papyrifera, popuifolia, and the exotic species Pendula, pubescens, platyphylla, and I'm not even going to pronounce that one, done in a common garden. When native pest meets non-native plant, who lives, who dies? 100% mortality in the non-native species, relatively good survival in the North American species. So it works both ways, right? These are documented examples how low hosted resistance, where coevolutionary history has been lacking. Bronze birch borer, elm ash borer, pine needle scale, adelgid, woolly adelgid on balsam, beech bark scale, viburnum leaf beetle, red bay ambrosia beetle, American chestnut, Dutch elm, thousand canker disease. So the takeaway here, the conclusion, if there is no coevolutionary history, non-native pests arriving in the U.S. will often enjoy defense-free space and devastate our native plants. Okay, that's the take home. And that's what we see over and over again. Well, the next question is the rate of invasion increasing? I can't see you guys, but how many people think the rate of forest invasive species is increasing? You can use that little hand symbol if you like. Put your hand up if you think so. I can't see you, so I can't tell. You know, I thought I knew the answer to this. They asked me to give a talk on this over in the UK. And I said, boy, that's got to be a no-brainer, right? That's got to be a no-brainer. But then I made a mistake. The mistake was to look at the data. You should never look at data. You should just make up stuff, and if you say it over enough, you'll believe it and others will too. I made the mistake at looking at the data. So here's what the data tells us. We get more invasive species all the time. There's no question that we get more. The fascinating part is the rate has not changed. The rate has been constant since the Industrial Revolution, when we developed a ship we could sail across the ocean in a matter of days rather than months, and it opened the world to exploration. And that hasn't changed since the 1860s into the 2000s. All right. So the rate is remaining constant. It doesn't mean we're not getting more all the time, but the rate hasn't changed. In this paper, Akama et al. Basically said there's a 32% chance that another highly destructive borer will enter the US in the next 10 years. In 2011, we got the palm borer. In 2017, the red bay ambrosia beetle. And we have this one that came in. It still doesn't have a name as far as I know between 2016 and 2019, another flat-headed borer. So spot on, and things are not going to change. Okay, so what does the future hold? We've explored some of the reasons for winners and losers. What does the future hold? I think with the circumstance of this is economic data is easy to find. These are our imports in billions of dollars from the 1970s through the 2000s. I will say that this curve bears a strong resemblance to this curve. So as long as this curve continues, I believe this curve continues. My other major belief is that in the coevolutionary matrix, Native plants will be at greater risk because of this. I really worry about our native plants. They're well defended in some cases against our native herbivores unless we superimpose something like impervious surface that eliminates all the carabids that feed on the cankerworms, right? There can be complicating factors. But when these non-native insects arrive, they arrive in defense-free space and often without their natural enemies. So to me, this is a major challenge of the urban environment. And the big gorilla, again, I've talked about the importance of impervious surface in terms of disrupting ecosystem function and processes. But the big gorilla, of course, is this one. And if we can't fix this, uh, when temperatures hit a daily high in parts of the world of 130 degrees Fahrenheit every single day, I think there's going to be a massive migration, the likes of which we've never seen before on this planet. And there's not going to be a wall big enough to keep those people from trying to get somewhere where it's a little cooler. So I think as a world, this is what we've got to figure out. We also have to work out on some of these other things. Finally, I'd like to say we've talked about a few of these points tonight, but we've got to increase the biodiversity in the built environment. It has to start at genetic level, plants that are reproducing sexually rather than clonally. I think they're going to be a better bet because they're going to have the natural resistance that we lose by cloning plants. It has to happen as not only at a species level, but also plant communities. And this is going to involve landscape architects and urban planners. Whenever possible, we need to use native plants to enhance ecosystem services and ecosystem processes, right? Providing alternative resources for pollinators and natural enemies, and again, supporting higher trophic levels. We have to reduce the threats of importing exotic species. This is going to take legislative change. This has to happen with officials who understand the billions of dollars that exotic species, non-native species, are costing the public every single year. We need better tools, better education, and training needed to enhance early detection and mitigation. Climate change, boy, we know about that, don't we? Got to reduce the fossil fuels. We need more green. Plants fix carbon. Plants lock up carbon and they take it out of the atmosphere and tie it up. We need more green. We need more green spaces in cities, green roofs, shrubs, ground covers. We need to replace impervious surface with pervious surfaces, ones that allow for water infiltration and reduce the stress that's created by water deprivation on plants and cities. And we didn't talk about this too much. When we apply soil amendments, nutrients, or pesticides, it has to be on a prescription basis, not on a cover spray or cover fertilization broad scale application. And for the creatures that thrive at nighttime, certainly there are ways to reduce artificial light at night. Simply turn off the lights at the ball field, turn off the lights in the parking lot. Along your walkways, put little covers over the tops of those little lights so the moths can find their ways and things like this. So there are things that can be done. So with that, I thank you very much for your time and attention. I've taken a little bit longer perhaps than I should have, but my bad on that. This was a maiden voyage, so maiden voyages sometimes are a little bit longer than well-studied journeys. But I hope that some of this was interesting. Perhaps you learned a thing or two. And I want to thank, of course, Fred and the End Society for inviting me. And of course, the folks that support my research and outreach. Fred, I'm going to turn it back to you. If folks have questions, I'd be happy to take a stab at them. If not, good night, happy spring, but happy to stick around for as long as you gals would like to talk. That's perfectly fine with me. This
Well,
is
yeah.
your night as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll probably have some questions, and you're getting a lot of thank yous and applause from the audience here. I guess you can see those as they float up there.
Yes, thank you guys. Wow, look at this. I did something right tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you covered a
Okay.
lot of bases, no question about it. And
A lot of
um,
stuff to think about.
absolutely. And I think what was really nice is that, as always, Mike, you bring it to uh, a level for the students to appreciate and understand very well. Um, and that is highly appreciated. Um,
Well,
we
thank you.
have, let me see in the chat, there's a lot of thank yous, and um, let's see if there's some questions in there for you. Okay. Let me scroll this down. Okay, so a lot of thank yous is what I'm seeing. I had a question I wanted to ask you.
Sure.
So remember when you mentioned the Lone Star tick and you showed the
Yeah.
map?
Yep.
Why isn't it going westward, but it's only going northward? I thought that was kind of weird.
Yeah, good question. These tick distributions are pretty funny. It's pretty much the same with the Exodus. We have an eastern species and a western species, and I guess
Uh-huh.
that's an evolutionary effect of the Rocky Mountains and dating back a long period of time. Let me see if I can get back to my tick map. But you're right. The range of expansion is much further, much quicker north than it is west. What do you guys think? I mean, my guess here is that probably the feral host, the natural host that this thing is depending on, small mammals, maybe begin to change rather dramatically as we come into our plains belts and the western part of Texas. I'm guessing it probably has to do with vegetation similarity and a disjunct between vegetation, which is supporting, both the tick, but probably more importantly, the small mammals that this tick is depending on. So if I was going to take a stab at it, I would say that perhaps is part of it. If anybody else has an idea, please join in. I know a lot of you guys are dealing with ticks, and maybe Harold has some idea as to what's going on with this. But that would be my first guess: is maybe the non-human hosts are more abundant here. There could be a bit of a divide here as well. I'm not sure. Or it could be habitat. I mean, you're talking more about forested areas here, I think, Fred, whereas out
Mhm.
here you're talking about plains, right?
Well, yeah, but when you look at Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas,
Yeah.
Nebraska, I'm not sure why that is there because,
Yep.
and certainly the mammals, I would expect, but I don't know if the mammals would
Well,
would
well,
be
the other
limited
thing,
by the
the
expansion.
the coastal thing is very easy, I think, Fred.
Mhm.
Basically a lethal lower temperature in winter. It's going to follow the coastline up. I didn't have a chance to talk about other examples. We see this also with things like southern pine beetle. When I first started, southern pine beetle was here. Midway in my career, it was there. A little later, it's there. Now it's all the way up here.
Mhm.
So again, a coastal distribution because of the warming effect, the great thermal effect we have of the warm ocean, I think is certainly allowing this kind of a distribution to happen. It could be, that lethal cold temperature, or a shorter warm season perhaps is limiting it. But again, why it's not going here, I can't explain that. If somebody else has a brilliant idea, I don't know, go for it.
Okay. Um, a student question. One
Sure.
of the students has asked, which insect species is currently the most threatened and why?
Oh
Is
my
there?
gosh. Well, golly, there are so many species threatened. Well, we know the most about. That's a wonderful question, and it's a fairly deep question. Um, I couldn't put my finger on one specific species. We have a burying beetle that's teetering or is already extinct. So we have certain individuals, certainly in Maryland, our own charismatic Baltimore is an endangered species. But in a general sense, I think here in at least in North America, obviously small endemic species are going to be the ones facing the greatest risk because a random perturbation, weather or otherwise development, may simply extirpate or cause an extinction of that. So we know there are cases of small butterflies, for example, on the coast of California that are highly endemic. I would think species like those butterflies are at great risk. There are certain bumblebees have been extirpated in places like England that are now only found on the continent. So there'll be specific cases, but the great unknown, as far as I'm concerned, is what's going on in our tropical rainforests and cloud forests. I mean, these are cases that are, for the most part, totally undocumented, and those habitats are simply disappearing. So those are the ones that I'm most concerned with in terms of
Yeah.
species loss, extinction, is in these fragile habitats that are changing very rapidly. Many of our bumblebees in Western states are not doing well. So those particular taxa, I think, are at great risk. I can't put
Yep.
my finger on, I can't give you just one. I can't put the one on the top of the list. Western monarchs, if you wanted to pick one, they're already below a hypothetical extinction line. And
Wow.
it's not going to take much to push those guys over the edge. I think, again, the monarch as a species, because of its wide distribution worldwide, is not in danger of extinction. But the West Coast population of migratory monarchs, I think, is at great risk of extinction due to warming. Those cool, moist forests on the Monterey Peninsula and throughout the coast of California are becoming hotter and drier. All right, so climate change, development, there's no question that development is removing those forests. So if I were to put my money on one going extinct on the lifetime of a particular student, I think the Western migratory monarch is a pretty safe bet that it could go extinct during your lifetime. So check back in with me in 40 years and my ghost, and let me know how that all worked out if you can.
Well, there's certainly a lot of species that you can point a finger at right there with that question. And as you said, there's no one thing that's very broad here. I mean, I can name you many butterflies in Maryland, for example, that are
Yeah,
pretty scarce now and even disappeared, in some cases. Um, and we don't know why. Like the little skipper, the Pyrgus centauri,
mm,
that little skipper has not been seen in Maryland in decades now. So, and I don't know why.
yeah.
Um, and there's quite a few other things that are really becoming scarce anymore. So
Yeah,
it's
Jill,
actually frightening.
it is very frightening. Jill, sure. Nice to hear from you, Jill, and I'm glad to see that my buddy Warren is also on tonight. Hi, guys. Lanternfly, there's good news on this front, I think, Jill. Again, I was at a meeting in, I don't know, St. Louis a couple years ago. I was talking to some of my arborists. I often speak at conferences about invasive species. And, I was talking to some guys. There were some folks from Kentucky in the audience, and they were pretty nervous about the spotted lanternfly. And I saw my buddies from Berks County, Pennsylvania, and I said, okay, guys, how's it going with spotted lanternfly up in Berks County? And they shrugged their shoulders and said, what lanternfly? So at ground zero, populations have already collapsed. In my short period of time, I own a piece of property in Sharpsburg. Uh, 5 years ago, there were no lanternflies. 4 years ago, I saw my first lanternflies. 3 years ago, there were thousands of lanternflies. 2 years ago, there were fewer lanternflies. There were many predators. We now have more than 1,000 different observations of both invertebrates and vertebrates feeding on lanternflies. Leading the pack are, make sure I get this right, I think the most number of observations of acts of predation are spiders, followed by praying mantises, followed by wasps, followed by predatory bugs. Um, for the vertebrates, there are more than 20 species of birds that now eat lanternflies. The other thing on this piece of land I described is this year, the spotted lanternflies have killed about 20% of the tree of heaven on my property, and the other 80% are the canopies are severely damaged. I expect them to die within the next couple years. So I think there are several good news features. I think as that tsunami rolls across Maryland and parts of Virginia, as with many other pests we've seen, including stink bugs, gypsy moths, there will be natural enemies, part of Mother Nature's hit squad, that will find these things an important food resource. Populations of predators will increase. Parasites, there are also pathogens. We've seen infections by various Bavarias that are affecting spotted lanternflies and bat koa. So there are pathogens that have collapsed lanternfly populations. So let's hold on and not panic. In the meantime, let's get rid of as many tree of heaven as possible. I think that's the best thing we can do. I think we probably know that squishing and stepping and scraping really are not things that affect the population dynamics of spotted lanternfly. So, if it makes you feel good, do it, but don't do it with belief that you've really put a dent in lanternfly populations. Now, in a vineyard, that's a totally different story. In vineyards, certainly scraping egg masses off the vines is going to be a good thing to do, and intervening when you have those things. But for the rest, I think Mother Nature will find a way to help reduce these populations, and that's already underway. And those lanternflies killed their primary host, so that's all good news too. Tree of Heaven's pretty invasive.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep,
Okay, it's working.
I think so.
Anybody else have some questions you'd like to ask? Speak up, turn your microphone on and ask if you would like to.
And it doesn't have to be things we've touched on tonight. If you have other questions about anything else that's going on right now, I did want to mention the box tree moth, and this is definitely something we want you to keep an eye out for, because this is a really nasty one. And if you do see it, it should be reported to the Maryland Department of Agriculture kind of ASAP. Because we're still trying to determine where it is. Again, as I said, the first confirmations were out at Fort Frederick in Washington County. A couple days later, we found an infestation in Clearwater or Clear Spring. This gentleman was a retired Park Service fellow. He had more than 100 boxwoods that he had planted over 40 years on his property. Every one of those boxwoods looked like that boxwood I showed you. There was 100% mortality in the span of 1 year. So this is going to be a fast mover. This thing flies pretty far. If it's caught early on a plant in the early stage, it's going to be very easy to control. You can control it with BTs. That's what they use in Europe. Also, you can use spinosad. That's an OMRI listed insecticide, safe for organic food production. So caterpillars are frankly easy to kill, but you're going to want to catch this very early. So learn your signs and symptoms if you have boxwoods. It's going to be very important.
Do other commercial pesticides work on it pretty well
Oh
too?
gosh, yeah, no,
Yeah,
but I'm really trying to steer people towards OMRI
safe.
listed, the ones
Yeah.
approved for organic and BT. If it was my plant and I saw a bunch of these guys, I'd probably go after it was spinosad, which is a very effective OMRI listed insecticide. Of course, the sledgehammers, your synthetic pyrethroids, permethrin and bifenthrin will put this down very quickly.
Okay.
But again, now you've got a long residual that may be interfering with beneficial insect populations that are also in that landscape. So I'd rather go with something a little softer that works pretty good.
Is 7 considered a softer or not really?
Well, not so much.
Not so much.
No,
Yeah.
it's seven is
Mhm.
it's a good general material. I'm not gonna dump on 7, but in terms of trying to, again, this notion of sustainability, what I'm always trying to do is use the material that's going to be least disruptive to a natural enemy community. So things that we know are not going to be particularly harmful for things like bees or butterflies or predators. Those are the things I'm steering towards, and spinosad kind of fits in that category. I will
Okay.
mention that spinosad should not be applied when plants are in bloom. So let your boxwood bloom and then come after it with your spinosad or one of these other materials. We can get this one, but the trick here, Fred, is going to be early detection. When you
Right.
first, and boxwoods have so many problems already. I think that's why people are missing it right now. We've got boxwood blight, we've got leaf miners, we've got spider mites, we've got psyllids. But man, if you've got a boxwood and you start to see little streaks of dead foliage on them, that's the point you need to dig in there and start looking for the webbing in those caterpillars and get on it right away.
We have a couple questions in the chat. May I read them
Sure.
to you?
Of
Okay.
course.
All right. First, David Florin, shout out David. He's up in New York, if I'm not mistaken,
Hey,
upstate New York
David.
now. In Millman's The Insect Crisis, he foresees significant decline of the insecta to the point of possible ecosystem and biome collapse within the next few centuries. Do you concur?
Well,
That's a tough one.
well, I'm not sure. Ecosystems will change dramatically. Will they collapse? Boy, that's a pretty profound statement. Will they collapse? Mother Nature has a way of filling voids. I think we've all seen this. So I think it's not going to be ecosystem collapse. I think what we're going to see ecosystems change. There's already good evidence. I mean, if you think about the history here in Eastern North America, we once had a forest dominated by American chestnut. They were extirpated, right? That forest was replaced with a hardwood forest. And in many cases, that hardwood forest, one of the climax trees, was an oak tree. We introduced gypsy moth, and our oak forest changed dramatically. Red maples, early successional plants, liriodendrons, gums, birches replaced oak. But those forests have now matured. So, it's to me a total collapse of an ecosystem. I guess, when the big comet hit, certainly that took place. Well, will a perturbation of that magnitude happen? I guess I have to say I'm pretty skeptical of this. I think I think our ecosystems in their grand diversity are highly resilient. And if we can release some of these pressures, particularly this gorilla I call climate change, that's what we really need to be working on. The other pieces of the puzzle, as I started out with my third slide, people need food, they need places to live, and they need fresh water. And that to me is another big tension, is how do we manage this earth in a way to support the given population? And maybe that's the thing that really has to change and likely will change. And once that changes, then many things can actually change for the better, I think. So I don't know, pretty profound stuff. We're really getting deep stuff here. But thanks a lot for that question. I mean, you gave me something to think about tonight. I'm going to have a nightmare, I think.
Another question. One of the students asked, have you researched artificial cloning of insects? Do you think it could positively impact the environment?
Artificial cloning of insects. Now that's a cool concept. Um, boy, um, I haven't thought about that. Well, I guess, boy, they're pretty good. They're pretty good at reproducing themselves. In fact, they're probably better at doing that than if we cloned them. I guess the question is cloning to what purpose? I mean,
Yeah,
certainly there are many places where we're actually using insect protein as a protein supplement, both for animal food but also for human food. Uh, I'm not sure, what the end objective of the cloning would be. Bugs are pretty good at reproducing on their own, I think. So, yeah.
perhaps transgenic insects
Oh,
with
sure,
some,
sure.
yeah,
No, golly, no. Transgenic insects are an entirely different story.
yeah,
The transgenic mosquito, the Aedes aegypti, transgenic mosquito has been a tremendous success story in the Caribbean, where they've created a strain that basically carries the male carries a lethal gene. When he mates with the female, the progeny are going to die. So, I mean, that's quite clever, sure. And there are many, many different kinds of transgenic insects that have been used for useful purposes. So, sure, we can do that. And I think that's a grand idea. Yeah. Uh, Ray St. Ledger in our department has made transgenic mosquitoes. He's made them, um, uh, uh, you know, uh, more susceptible to various kinds of interventions by changing their genome. So, um, again, there are lots of good opportunities to use transgenics in a beneficial way to solve pest problems. No
right.
question there.
A last question on the chat. Um, and by the way, the student who asked that says thank you, and that's what she was referring to was,
Oh, okay, Brittany.
yeah,
I'm glad we got on the right track
there
there.
you go.
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
you see the other student there, Mike? She says, how can policies or organizations like USDA, NIFA help solve this issue? I think she posted that question when you were talking about the invasive moths, but I'm not sure uh,
Yeah, no, I
which issue.
mean, that's exactly what these agencies have got to do. But I mean, we're vastly underfunded in these exact agencies that are charged with not only, trying to detect these imports rapidly. It's simply an overwhelming problem. I think. There are literally tens of thousands of containers that arrive in this country from foreign ports every single day. And there's a infinitesimally small number of those that are inspected to the point where we could detect invasive species coming in. I think the folks at APHIS are doing a fantastic job intercepting these things and turning them back in our ports on a daily basis. This happens. So, certainly more money, but, the other piece of the puzzle is when we do get the next emerald ash borer, uh, or box tree moth, I mean, who winds up paying for this? It's not the guy that shipped it over here uh, in a shipment of stones from China, where the spotted lanternfly egg masses come in, or in a crate where emerald ash borer arrived. It's us. So perhaps there could be something done on the other end to make sure that these things simply don't get into containers, or create what, oh God, tariff. Oh my goodness. What would happen? Tariffs. What would happen if we just took $1 for every container that came into the country and established a fund? So when the next emerald ash borer arrives, we've got $2 billion to re-tree Chicago. What would happen? It wouldn't cost a lot, right? We've had enough of tariffs, but maybe 50 cents would do it. When if you've got, 2 million containers coming in a year, 50 cents would put enough money in the kitty to plant some trees back in Baltimore after all the ash trees go away, wouldn't it? I don't know. There's got to be a problem, but again, a solution to this. But we need legislators who understand this problem
Yes.
and need to take action to help detect these things, train people, and when we find them, get rid of them. I mean, there weren't resources available to get rid of brown marmorated stink bug in Berks County. There were volunteers that killed 1.5 million spotted lanternflies. It wasn't the federal government. It was people out there scraping egg masses. So we need funds for these things, I think, and we need legislators who understand this and will help us to find ways that once they do get here, to get rid of these things. I don't know. What do I know? I'm just a bug guy.
No, what the problem is, if they did put a little money aside, as you're saying, then when there was any accumulation of money, they invariably take the money and spend it on something else that it wasn't intended for.
Well, it could happen too, I guess, huh?
Oh my God, it happens all the time.
Well, these are things are beyond me. So
Yeah, but that's a great idea, I think. If it could be implemented, that'd be a great idea. Why not?
yeah,
Just to ensure that it stays where you intend it, though. That's the thing. But
yeah. But
anyway,
certainly we need more money, and money for exploration right now. I mean, this box tree moth, somewhere back in Asia, there's a parasitic wasp that nails this thing. We need the resources to go there, find that thing, clear it through quarantine, and bring it over here so we can get rid of this. So, um, yeah. But in the meantime, we do the best we can, I think.
all right. Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat. So if
That's a wrap.
anybody, yeah.
All right,
And
gang. Thanks a lot for
thank
inviting me
you.
into your homes
Thank
this
you.
evening. It was a pleasure. I
Great
hope
talk.
you learned something, maybe had some fun as well. And I'll see you on the hobo trail sometime.
Nice to see
Thank
you again after 40 years.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
good to see you too.
Say
I'm
hi,
up here in
Paula.
Fishers, Indiana.
Good to see you, Bill. Yep.
Great
Okay,
talk.
Dr. Mike, thank you so much, and we greatly appreciate you. I'm going to need to get a mailing address from you so we can send you some things, okay?
Well,
Your preferred mailing address, wherever that might be.
Well, yeah, but I would rather if if it's like a sweatshirt, that's cool, or a water bottle, that's cool. But if you're thinking about sending money, well, I'd much rather don't make a donation to the Maryland Entomological Society. But if it's a cool shirt, I'll give you an address. If this is a monetary thing, I want to make a donation in kind to the Maryland and SOC.
You are very kind. That would be really appreciated. And but we also, I mean, in addition, there's a journal that we want to send you too. So I don't know if you're already getting it or not, but
Yeah, I said I'm a subscriber to the
okay,
journal.
okay,
Yep, I'm
okay.
covered, right, Gene? Did I pay up? Where's Gene? Is he still there?
He's still there, I'm sure.
Oh, Gene,
You're good.
I hope I paid my dues. Hey, George, how you doing? I see George Foster there too, man. This is like old home week. This is
Well,
great.
Yeah, hi, Mike.
Hey,
Yeah,
George, how you doing, man?
we're terrific, and that's here too. She loved your talk too. She was both of us.
Yeah, Mike, I'm not an entomologist, but your talk was amazing.
Oh gosh, all right. I try not to use. I get lectured sometime. I teach a course on how not to use jargon, so I hope I didn't jargonize too much here tonight.
You definitely were right on.
Well,
All right, good.
one of the things I said to my husband, like, I'm married to a bug nerd, so I probably know more about insects than most wives do, but you explain things very, like, they were very easy to understand.
Well, he is a teacher after all.
Well, you know, science should not be mystical or complicated. Science is fun, and frankly, it should be pretty easy to explain to people what we do and how things are, I think, huh?
Can I ask you one question? Because
Of course you can.
I want to make sure I heard you right when you were talking about the tropical rainforest.
Yeah.
Providing, which I knew, but was it really 2/3?
Yeah, you know, I got that. I tried to indicate my let me pop out of this. Yeah, it was 2/3, and if I can get back to that slide, let me escape this and get into the other view here. And if I cannot, I'm going to try to find you that reference, okay?
And I can believe it because I'm a nurse and I know we get a lot of our stuff from there, but it was also very scary to me to see how, we're killing off the things that could save us.
Well, no, it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, this palm oil thing, I was in Borneo a year or two ago, and I go to Costa Rica, and I just can't believe how much of that rainforest is being destroyed to grow palm oil. I mean, it's zany to me, that takes place. But yeah, that's I'm not sure where I got that number from. Here we go.
Yeah.
I'm surprised in
Tropical
Costa Rica.
rainforest science. It came from a Weebly. Canadian Pharmacy Meds is the site. You can go check it out. Now, again, I can't vouch for this. I don't know. I mean, who knows? Who knows what that is exactly?
Well,
But
I know we get a lot of agents for our drugs and not just chemotherapy.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, vinblastine comes from vincas, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these, centromere disruptors basically are coming from plants, which is cool. The spindle fibers, that I think is the mode of action of vinblastine is it destroys spindle formation and cell division. So a lot of these things are very clever in how they work, and who knows why that evolved that way, but it's darn lucky we found it. And it's just a crisis that we don't know what those plants are, what they might contain, beyond just the wonder of the biodiversity. We get enthralled by the wonderful insects and herps and things we see, but golly, just the wonderful compounds that might be in those plants. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Man, we're going to slowly kill ourselves.
Slow or fast, one or the other, but we're pretty resilient as a species. I got a hunch we're going to be around for a while anyway, where we tend to be pretty clever and sneaky and resilient. So I think we may be okay. Actually, the rest of the place, maybe not so much, but I think we're going to be okay.
Well, I know we're kind of old, so we won't live to see it, but
That's one way to think about it. Remember what I said about the sustainability. Second slide. Come on, we got to think about the grandkids and their kids, right?
Yeah.
We got to save this planet, gang.
Listen, I'm a nurse at the hospital, and when I'm getting ready to semi-retire, and I'm going to get involved with our local government, because what I see at my hospital, I'm sure is happening across every hospital in the United States. The amount of trash and plastic that we put in the environment and the not recycling is just, it makes me sick to my stomach.
Well, and in ourselves, this microplastic thing is pretty fascinating. You know, I'm still waiting to find out what exactly that's going to translate into in terms of human disease, but that's pretty frightening.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I work in the NICU, so it's the neonatal ICU. So every baby that is on feeds either OG or NG, because they can't like eat through their mouth, so we have a feeding tube in them.
Yeah.
Like every single baby in the NICUs across the country, if they're being fed every 3 hours, multiply that times 24 hours, that's 8 feeds, like huge syringes, plastic tubing.
Yeah.
It's just sickening.
Yeah. Yeah, we do the best we can, I guess.
Well, they need to make it recyclable, and hospitals need to be held accountable to recycle all these plastics.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, that's my rant for the night. Sorry.
Well, that's good. No, it's good. Venting is good. That's what Paula tells me. She says venting is good. So I'm glad that you got that out, and you'll probably sleep better. So that's good.
Well, all the young nurses look at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, you all have kids. You understand? You know, by 2035, they're saying like 35% of the ocean is going to have plastic in it. Like,
yeah, sure.
Your world, you need to start caring about it.
I know. I've been to the ocean side of several Caribbean islands, and you know the waste you see there piled up on the beach is just the windward side is just incredible. Just incredible.
Even in the Caribbean now. Ugh.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Yep.
Well, on a happy note, it's the first day of spring, and spring flowers are coming out. So just
yes, they are.
Take walks.
Yes, they are. The daffodils are up. My snowdrops are almost finished, but yeah, it's gonna happen. And I guess we're gonna hit, they said, the high 70s maybe this weekend. That'll be great.
Yeah.
That'll be great.
Okay, Mike, I have one more question for you. I'm going to diverse further since I have your attention. So I bought a tropical hibiscus tree that I keep in our deck in the summer.
Oh boy.
And I brought it in this winter.
Oh boy.
I have been fighting. I've never had plants in my house because my cat used to always eat everything. So
yeah, you got scale insects, right?
No.
Aphids,
and we can't get rid of them.
Oh golly. Well, heck, get some lacewing larvae. That'll be fun. That'll be a circus. Yeah.
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 I mean,
I mean, you could put something on there.
We've tried everything. We've tried everything. I've tried homemade cocktails. You know.
Oh, don't do that. No homemade cocktails. No. We can't recommend homemade cocktails. No, that's against our policy.
No. I'm just saying. I grew up in Pennsylvania. My aunt and uncle had a 200-acre farm. And there was a lot of remedies they used. And this is not complicated. It's just ivory dish soap and some oil and some water.
Yep.
But it killed a lot of things. And I've tried the hazardous stuff.
Yeah.
I literally made my husband I made George drag this huge tree into my shower or wherever, and like sprayed the hell out of it, trying to.
And they're slowly coming back.
It's like, what do we have to do?
Well, I just, as an agent of the university, I cannot endorse that and recommend it.
Well,
I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, or it might not work, but I can't say that.
Can you recommend anything that we can use?
Well, let's see. These are aphids. I'm trying to think if what I would try to do is find a soil systemic insecticide that you could put into the plant, either as a granular, as a drench, that'd be taken up. And I don't know what's on the homeowner market. I would have to dive into that a little bit.
I tried to, but a lot of
some of them you can't ship.
They're all banned in Maryland.
Well, there are other soil systemics that aren't neonicotinoids. I know that acephate is soon going to be gone. That's the word on the street. Acephate is a good systemic and it can move through the soil, but you need to find one that's labeled for home use. A celiprin is probably chlorantraniliprole is another good systemic that can be put through the soil, or it can be translaminar foliar. And I don't know if there's a homeowner product, an RTU, that's got chlorantraniliprole in it. I'd have to do a dive into the literature on that, but I would start by looking like doing a search for something like soil systemic insecticide for homeowners or something like that, and see what you come up with.
Hey, Mike, what about parasites for aphids, the little waspies? Are they?
You could, Jill, but you'd need to be able to support them probably with a nectar source, whether there's enough honeydew in there for them to stick around. Not a bad idea if you could enclose it, sure. If you could get this thing in, you can buy these collapsible wet mesh cages. If you could get that plant in there, you could give that a try. Or as I said, lacewing larvae love to eat aphids. They're really good on aphids. Or you can use a combination. We've in the laboratory sometimes we'll put in the parasite, the aphidius, and the lacewing larvae at the same time, and you could give that a shot. Again, you can buy these large collapsible cages that got a little bit of spiral wire that holds them upright. If you can get your plant inside that thing, you can probably order your parasitic wasp. Just go online. Let's see, who's got those? Copert probably would be a good place to start. Koppert. I think they're from the Netherlands. And look for aphid parasites, or lots of places supply a lacewing larvae. And you just would tap them out inside that cage and they would go to work. They'd eat all the aphids and then they'd eat each other until there's just one big fat one left. So
wow.
That'll be fun.
Yeah. I mean, we brought this plant and it's growing. It's beautiful.
Go outside soon.
And it's been blooming all winter long with these beautiful blooms.
Well, maybe you're okay. Maybe when you put that thing outside, the natural parasitic wasp will glom onto it, and you'll get some harmonia there. You'll get some multicolored Asian lady beetles to jump on there, and they may clean it up for you. So hey, it's going to be pretty soon, right? Pretty soon you can put it back outside. We're almost over the hump.
Another few weeks. Yep.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Good luck with that one.
Well, okay, folks.
Gang. Well, again, Fred, thanks so much, and we'll be in touch. I'll come back another time, and we'll hit the other 5 things I didn't get a chance to talk about on my list of 7. We can do something else another time.
That would be super. Thank you so much, Mike. We kept you way too long, but you're a great sport.
No, this is good fun.
Good.
It's a good evening.
We think so.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay. You take care. We'll be in touch. Right. Thank you so much.
See you, gang. Nice to see all you guys.
Bye-bye.
Guys and gals. Good night.